In 1885, a struggling priest arrived in a tiny hilltop village in southern France. There was nothing remarkable about the assignment. The village was small. The church was deteriorating. The population was shrinking. If anyone had predicted that this forgotten corner of France would one day attract treasure hunters, historians, journalists, and curious travelers from around the world, they would have been laughed out of the village. Yet within a few years, something happened that nobody could explain. The priest began spending money. A lot of money. He restored buildings, purchased expensive decorations, entertained important visitors, funded projects that should have been impossible for someone living on a modest church salary. People asked where the money came from. The answers never satisfied anyone. More than a century later, the same question remains. Did he uncover a hidden treasure? Ancient documents? A secret powerful enough to change his life forever? Tonight, we travel to Rennes-le-Château, where a poor priest became unexpectedly wealthy, and where one discovery may create one of France's greatest historical mysteries. Part 1. The village that nobody noticed. Long before books, documentaries, and treasure hunters transformed Rennes-le-Château into a destination for curious travelers, it was simply a small village perched high above the valleys of the Aude region in southern France. Even today, visitors are often surprised by how modest the village appears. Narrow streets wind between old stone buildings. The surrounding landscape stretches for miles, revealing vineyards, forests, and distant ridges that glow under the Mediterranean sun. It is undeniably beautiful, but beauty alone does not explain why people travel from around the world to stand here. In the 19th century, there was even less reason to visit. Major trade routes bypassed the village. Economic opportunities were limited. Many young residents left in search of work elsewhere. The population gradually declined. Rennes-le-Château seemed destined to remain one of countless quiet communities scattered across the French countryside. When Béranger Saunier arrived in 1885, he stepped into a village facing challenges familiar to many rural communities of the era. Resources were scarce. The church dedicated to Mary Magdalene showed clear signs of neglect. Portions of the structure required repair. Interior furnishings were aging. The parish generated little income. From a career perspective, it was not considered an attractive assignment. Ambitious priests often hoped for positions in larger towns where influence and opportunities were greater. Rennes-le-Château offered neither. Yet Saunier approached the situation differently. Rather than viewing the village as a temporary stop, he appeared determined to improve it. Those who study his life often note that he possessed unusual energy and persistence. He was not content to simply maintain the status quo. Soon after arriving, he began identifying projects that needed attention. The church required restoration. The grounds needed improvement. Buildings demanded maintenance. These goals were reasonable, but they presented an obvious problem. Every repair required money, and the parish had very little. Like many clergy of the time, Saunier sought donations and support wherever he could find them. There was nothing unusual about that. Across France, churches depended on contributions to fund restoration work. Nobody looked at the young priest and imagined he would become the center of a mystery discussed more than a century later. As renovation plans moved forward, attention focused on the church itself. The structure had stood for generations, surviving political upheavals, economic hardships, and changing times. Restoration work often reveals forgotten details hidden beneath years of neglect. Old walls are examined, floors are lifted, decorative elements are repaired or replaced. During these projects, workers sometimes encounter items left behind by earlier generations. Most discoveries are mundane. Occasionally, they are not. Accounts surrounding Rennes-le-Château differ in their details, but many versions describe unusual findings connected to restoration efforts. Some stories mention ancient parchments. Others refer to concealed objects discovered within parts of the church. Historians continue debating exactly what occurred, but one fact remains significant. The stories began during the period when Saunier was overseeing repairs. At first, nothing dramatic seemed to happen. The church gradually improved. Necessary work moved forward. Residents likely appreciated seeing local landmarks restored rather than abandoned. Yet subtle changes soon appeared in the priest's circumstances. Small projects expanded into larger ones. Improvements accelerated. Expenditures increased. The pace of development began exceeding what many villagers expected from a parish operating on limited resources. People noticed because village life leaves little room for anonymity. In large cities, financial changes can go unnoticed. In small communities, everyone sees what is happening. The priest's ambitions continued growing. Repairs led to renovations. Renovations led to construction. New ideas emerged. New purchases followed. As months turned into years, the scale of spending became increasingly difficult to reconcile with his known income. Villagers talked among themselves. Some admired the improvements. Others wondered how they were being financed. At this stage, there were no grand treasure theories. Nobody was discussing ancient conspiracies. The questions were far simpler. How could a priest assigned to a struggling village afford so much? Why did the flow of money seem to increase rather than decrease? Most importantly, what had changed? The answers never arrived. Instead, the spending continued. And with every new project, curiosity grew stronger. The forgotten village on the hilltop was about to become the center of a mystery that would outlive everyone involved. The young priest who arrived with modest means was slowly transforming both the church and his own future. Before long, people would stop asking how the renovations were being funded. They would begin asking a far more intriguing question. What had Berenger Saunier found? Part 2. The priest who shouldn't have had money. The transformation did not happen all at once. That is what makes the story so fascinating. If Berenger Saunier had suddenly appeared with a fortune overnight, the explanation might have been easier to uncover. Instead, the changes arrived in stages, each one creating a little more curiosity than the last. A repair here, an improvement there, then another project, then another. Individually, each expense could be explained. Together, they create a financial picture that made less sense with every passing year. By the early 1890s, residents of Rennes-le-Château were witnessing something unusual. The church restoration had expanded far beyond basic repairs. Saunier was no longer simply fixing structural problems. He was transforming the entire property. New decorative elements arrived from distant workshops. Religious statues were purchased. Artistic details appeared throughout the church. Materials that cost money continued arriving in a village where money was supposed to be scarce. The improvements were impressive, but they also raised an uncomfortable question. How was he paying for all of it? The mystery deepened when the spending moved beyond the church itself. Saunier began acquiring land. Construction projects appeared that had little to do with ordinary parish responsibilities. One of the most striking developments was the construction of a library tower that overlooked the surrounding countryside. Known today as the Tour Magdala, the structure remains one of the village's most recognizable landmarks. Building it required planning, labor, materials, and funding, yet the tower was only one part of a much larger vision. Gardens were developed, walkways were created, additional buildings were improved. The priest who had arrived in a struggling village now seemed capable of financing projects that exceeded the expectations of a modest rural parish. Visitors noticed. Villagers noticed. Church officials noticed. The questions became more frequent. Saunier's official income should have been limited. Parish priests in rural France were not wealthy. Their salaries were known. Their financial circumstances were generally understood. Yet the scale of his expenditures suggested access to resources far beyond those normally available. Some observers estimated that he spent amounts equivalent to what prosperous businessmen might spend, not what a village priest could reasonably afford. The numbers simply did not align. Then came another development that fueled speculation. Important visitors began appearing. People traveled considerable distances to meet him. Some were members of higher society. Others held influence in political or religious circles. Why would such individuals visit a remote hilltop village that most people had never heard of? The answer was never clear. What is clear is that Rennes-le-Château was no longer isolated from the outside world. Something was drawing attention to the village, and much of that attention centered on Saunier himself. As rumors spread, explanations emerged. Some people believed wealthy benefactors were secretly supporting his projects. Perhaps a generous donor admired his work and preferred to remain anonymous. This theory sounded reasonable at first, but evidence remained limited. Others suggested that he had inherited money from relatives or supporters. Again, no convincing documentation emerged. Every explanation solved one problem while creating another. Then villagers began comparing what they knew: the tower, the gardens, the church decorations, the land acquisitions, the furnishings, the constant flow of improvements. Each item represented another expense. Each expense required funding. The cumulative total became increasingly difficult to ignore. What transformed curiosity into genuine suspicion was not simply the existence of money. It was the apparent absence of a believable source. If a wealthy relative had died, people would know. If a major inheritance existed, records would exist. If a benefactor financed everything, evidence would likely appear. Instead, uncertainty remained. And uncertainty invites speculation. By the late 1890s, stories about the priest's wealth had spread beyond the village itself. Nearby communities discussed the situation. Visitors arrived hoping to understand what was happening. Some admired Saunier's accomplishments. Others questioned them. The debate gradually shifted from practical concerns to deeper possibilities. If ordinary explanations failed, perhaps extraordinary ones deserved consideration. This is where the mystery took a dramatic turn. People began looking backward, back to the church, back to the renovation work, back to the reports of unusual discoveries, back to the stories involving hidden documents. Because if Saunier had found something during those early restoration efforts, it could explain everything that followed. The timing was difficult to ignore. Before the renovations, he struggled financially. After the renovations, money seemed to flow. The sequence was not proof, but it was enough to keep the questions alive. Then another event added fuel to the growing fire. Saunier traveled to Paris. For a village priest, this was not necessarily unusual. Priests travel for many reasons. Yet accounts of the trip would later become one of the most debated chapters in the entire story. Some reports claimed he carried documents with him. Others suggested he met individuals with access to powerful information. Details remain disputed, but one thing is certain. After Paris, the rumors intensified. People no longer asked whether something unusual had happened. They began asking what it was. Had he uncovered evidence connected to noble families, ancient records, lost property claims, forgotten history? Nobody knew. The mystery was no longer confined to unexplained spending. Now it involved potential discoveries, secret documents, and a chain of events that seemed increasingly connected. And at the center of everything stood a priest who refused to provide a clear answer. The more people investigated, the more questions emerged. The money remained unexplained. The projects continued. The village grew famous. And somewhere between a deteriorating church and a sudden fortune lay the discovery that may have changed Béranger Saunier's life forever. What happened during those renovations will become the most controversial part of the entire story. Part 3. The documents that changed everything. If the mystery of Rennes-le-Château has a turning point, it begins inside the Church of St. Mary Magdalene during the restoration work. This is the moment where the story shifts from unexplained wealth to something far more intriguing. According to accounts that emerged over the years, Saunier's workers were examining part of the church when they encountered something unexpected. Versions differ depending on the source, but the most persistent story involves ancient parchments discovered within a hollow Visigothic pillar supporting the altar. Hidden inside were documents that had remained unseen for generations. Whether every detail of that account is accurate remains fiercely debated. Historians disagree. Researchers argue over sources. Yet the story refuses to disappear because of what supposedly happened next. The documents immediately captured Saunier's attention. These were not ordinary church records. They were described as old, possibly valuable, potentially significant. Some accounts claim they contain genealogical information. Others suggest coded messages. Certain versions describe references to noble bloodlines stretching back centuries. What exactly was written on the parchments remains one of the most contested aspects of the entire mystery. The original documents have never produced a universally accepted explanation. Instead, they generated a chain reaction of speculation that continues today. What makes the story compelling is not simply the existence of the parchments. It is what Saunier allegedly did after finding them. According to later accounts, he traveled to Paris carrying copies or originals of the documents. For a priest from an isolated village, Paris represented an entirely different world. It was a center of political influence, intellectual life, religious authority, and cultural power. If the documents were meaningless, there would be little reason to make such a journey. Yet he went, and that trip became one of the most debated episodes in the entire story. Reports suggest he met individuals connected to religious institutions and scholarly circles. Some versions claim he sought assistance interpreting the documents. Others suggest he consulted experts capable of understanding ancient texts. A few theories go even further, proposing that the information contained within the parchments was so sensitive that it attracted the attention of powerful people. Again, proof remains elusive, but the timing is difficult to ignore. Before the alleged discovery, Saunier struggled financially. Afterward, money began appearing. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, and then increasingly. The sequence became the foundation for nearly every theory that followed. Some researchers believe the documents revealed information about forgotten property rights. If true, valuable land or assets could potentially have been claimed. Others suggest hidden deposits of wealth connected to earlier generations. Southern France possesses a complex history involving Roman settlements, Visigothic rulers, medieval nobles, and religious conflicts. Over centuries, fortunes were lost, hidden, seized, and redistributed. The idea that forgotten wealth might exist somewhere in a region is not impossible. Yet another possibility fascinated researchers even more. What if the documents themselves were valuable, not because they pointed to treasure, but because of the information they contained? Information can be worth more than gold. A document can alter reputations, change historical narratives, affect political interests, influence powerful institutions. If Saunier discovered information someone desperately wanted hidden or revealed, its value could have extended far beyond money. Then came another strange detail. As his project expanded, Saunier rarely behaved like someone afraid of losing his fortune. Instead, he spent aggressively. He built, decorated, improved, expanded. A man who unexpectedly acquires wealth often protects it. Saunier seemed determined to use it. That behavior has puzzled researchers for decades. Was he confident the money would continue? Did he know something others did not? Or was he simply enjoying opportunities he never expected to possess? The questions multiplied. Then another mystery emerged. Visitors began noticing unusual symbols and decorative choices around the church grounds. Certain inscriptions attracted attention. Religious imagery appeared alongside elements that researchers later scrutinized for hidden meaning. Over time, every statue, every inscription, and every architectural feature became part of the investigation. Some observers saw clues. Others saw coincidence. The problem was that nobody could separate fact from interpretation with complete confidence, and that uncertainty allowed the mystery to grow. As years passed, the story evolved beyond the village itself. Writers became interested, researchers arrived, rumors expanded, theories became increasingly ambitious. Some connected Rennes-le-Château to hidden treasure, others connected it to secret societies. Some suggested links to medieval orders. Others proposed connections to lost archives. Then came the theory that would transform the village into an international phenomenon, a theory so extraordinary that it would attract millions of readers and inspire decades of debate. According to this idea, the documents discovered by Saunier contained information capable of rewriting accepted history itself. Not treasure, not gold, not property. History, whether true or false. The theory changed everything. The village was no longer simply a place where a priest became wealthy. It became a place where people believed a secret might exist that powerful individuals had spent centuries protecting. And from that moment forward, Rennes-le-Château stopped being a local mystery. It became a global one. The problem was that every new theory created another challenge. The more attention the story received, the harder it became to distinguish evidence from imagination. Yet despite decades of investigation, one stubborn fact remained unchanged. Nobody could fully explain where Saunier's money came from, and that unanswered question continues to keep the mystery alive. Part 4:4, the village that became a question. Most mysteries fade with time. Witnesses die, documents disappear, and public interest moves elsewhere. Rennes-le-Château followed the opposite path. The farther it moved from the lifetime of Bérenger Saunière, the larger the mystery became. By the time the 20th century gained momentum, people were no longer discussing a village priest who had spent more money than expected. They were debating possibilities that ranged from hidden treasure to lost archives, from forgotten noble fortunes to secrets buried deep within French history. What began as local curiosity gradually transformed into a phenomenon that attracted journalists, researchers, historians, adventurers, and eventually tourists from around the world. Yet despite all the attention, the central problem remained unchanged. Nobody could explain the source of Saunière's wealth with complete certainty. Every investigation solved one piece of the puzzle, while creating two more questions. Some researchers examined financial records and proposed that the priest may have accumulated money through the sale of religious masses on a scale that violated church regulations. The theory explained part of the income, but critics argued it failed to account for the full extent of the spending. Others searched for evidence of wealthy benefactors operating behind the scenes. If influential supporters secretly funded his projects, it would explain the renovations without requiring treasure or secret documents. Yet, once again, the evidence remained incomplete. Theories emerged. Evidence was debated. Certainty remained elusive. Then the mystery entered an entirely new phase. Writers began connecting Rennes-le-Château to larger historical narratives. Some proposed that the documents allegedly discovered during the church restoration contained information linked to medieval noble families. Others suggested the parchments pointed toward hidden repositories of wealth accumulated during centuries of political upheaval. Southern France had witnessed Roman occupation, Visigothic rule, crusades, religious conflicts, and shifting alliances among powerful families. The region possessed layer upon layer of history, providing fertile ground for speculation. If a secret had survived somewhere within that landscape, Rennes-le-Château seemed like the perfect place for it to emerge. As books appeared, public fascination accelerated. Visitors arrived not simply to see the village, but to search for clues. Every path became significant. Every stone attracted attention. Every architectural detail inspired interpretation. Travelers wandered through the church studying inscriptions. They examined statues. They photographed carvings. They compared notes with fellow visitors. What made the phenomenon remarkable was that different people arrived seeking different answers. Some hoped to uncover evidence of hidden treasure. Others wanted historical explanations. A few searched for connections to broader legends that had grown around the village. The mystery became large enough to accommodate countless interpretations. Yet the village itself remained remarkably small. Visitors expecting a sprawling archaeological site often found something very different. Rennes-le-Château is still a quiet hilltop community. The church still stands. The tower built by Saunière still overlooks the valleys below. The surrounding countryside remains breathtakingly beautiful. Standing there today, it can be difficult to reconcile the peaceful atmosphere with the enormous theories that have emerged from the location. Yet perhaps that contrast explains why the mystery survives. Extraordinary stories are often attached to extraordinary places. Rennes-le-Château feels ordinary at first glance. That makes the unanswered questions more powerful. If the village contained obvious evidence, the mystery would already be solved. Instead, visitors leave carrying the same uncertainty that has frustrated researchers for generations. What exactly happened here? What did Saunière discover during those renovations? Why did his financial circumstances change so dramatically? Why did he never provide an explanation capable of ending the debate? The most fascinating aspect of Rennes-le-Château may be that every major theory contains both strengths and weaknesses. The treasure theories explain the money, but struggle to produce proof. The document theories explain the trip to Paris, but leave financial questions unanswered. The financial misconduct theories explain some income, but not the scale of the projects. No single explanation closes every gap. That is why the mystery endures. It resists simple answers. It survives scrutiny. Each generation examines the evidence, develops new theories, and ultimately confronts the same obstacle encountered by those who came before. The story never reaches a definitive conclusion. More than a century after Bérenger Saunière's death, the village continues attracting people who believe they might see something others missed. Some arrive as skeptics, others arrive as believers. Nearly all leave with questions. And perhaps that is a true legacy of Rennes-le-Château. Not treasure, not secret societies, not hidden documents. A question powerful enough to transform a forgotten hilltop village into one of France's most enduring historical mysteries, and strong enough to keep people searching long after the priest who started it all was gone. Today, visitors can still walk the same narrow streets, enter the same church, and stand beside the same tower that became part of this remarkable story. They can look across the valleys of southern France and wonder what Bérenger Saunière knew, what he found, and why the truth seemed to disappear with him. More than a century has passed, yet Rennes-le-Château continues to challenge anyone who tries to explain it. Was the answer hidden in forgotten documents, concealed wealth, or something far less dramatic? No one has proven it. The debate continues. If you enjoyed exploring this fascinating corner of France and the mystery that transformed it forever, be sure to subscribe to Tilt and Chill. Join us as we continue traveling to remarkable places where history, legends, and unanswered questions still capture the imagination. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the stories hidden across our world.